Hi, Beth. How are you?
I am great. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure to have you here. As you and I have worked together already before in a client relationship with my production company, and I absolutely love the work that I've gotten to see firsthand that you're doing at the Philadelphia Youth Sports Collaborative, and I'm eager to share with my listeners what that work is. So, can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and
Sure.
how you came to serve in your current role as executive director at Philadelphia Youth Sports Collaborative?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a lifelong athlete. I played everything that came down the pike. I lived near a park. I had a bike and had access to different sports. And I found that my life always felt more comfortable and better when I was involved in that type of activity. I was at home in a sport space. So it didn't matter what it was. It was always something. And I just really felt like my people were there. And so for me, it was just a kind of way of life growing up with sports. And, I played sports in college and then I worked in sports. And so finding a role in the nonprofit community, which I've always been interested in, because I do find that you if you know me, you know that I'm a helper in some way, shape, or form. And I think that there are people who just get called to work like this. And so, I've been in and out of corporate spaces, but I always kind of come home to finding ways to help, and to be able to do that in a sports space is really just sort of like, the icing on the cake for me. So, I was born and raised in Delaware County. I'm the youngest of 7. Lots of nieces and nephews. The numbers are staggering. We're taking over the world one child at a time. And so I've just always been around like a lot of activity and a lot of people. And but my comfort zone was always with teammates and with friends in the sports space. So in my career, I started a small nonprofit for girls to get girls active, because what I found was, girls weren't as active as boys, and the numbers around obesity were just kind of mind blowing when people started paying attention to that. And I just thought, I'm guessing there's pockets of girls that just don't know where to start or have access to things to keep them active. And so that's kind of what brought me into the space of like sports-based youth development, which I had never heard as a term prior to kind of stumbling into this space. And so the Philadelphia Youth Sports Collaborative on our parallel, lines was forming to bring all of the various providers of youth sport to children who didn't have access together, and that was the role of the Philadelphia Youth Sports Collaborative. And it was in its first iteration, it was a networking group. They did some projects together. There was maybe 25, 30 organizations on the list that used to come together on a regular basis and just kind of support one another, because it is hard work and you're always starting small, and you want to learn how to grow and how to reach more children. And the Sports Collaborative, PYSC, we'll call it that, just brought people around the table to learn from one another. And in 2016, when I finally left all my jobs to do my small organization, PYSC on that parallel line was reforming as a standalone 501c3. And I met the Kenny Holtzman, who is just a great friend. And I met him, and he had this vision that Philadelphia, because of the sheer number of providers in the youth sports space, had this opportunity to really change the way young people access quality sport. And this vision really spoke to me as a person who probably was a lot better at building relationships and putting the puzzle pieces together than I was at actually providing programs to girls in various schools and neighborhoods. So I kind of fell into it by meeting Kenny Holtzman, but he was tenacious and kept showing me the business plan and talking about what it could be. And I remember thinking, let me put my hat in the ring and I'll figure out how to keep the girls' organization going, which we did for a period of time. Unfortunately, in the pandemic, it sort of, it was school-based, and Philadelphia schools were closed a lot longer than suburban schools. So unfortunately, the girls' organization sunsetted, but PYSC has just exploded. And so that's sort of my pathway to it. I've been there since we did reform in 2016.
It does sound like it's now knowing that whole background, it sounds like it was the perfect opportunity for you and the perfect space for you to step into, given your entire life, what led you to that moment. And unfortunate that the girls program sunsetted. However, you're now doing so much in this role that sounds like it's very aligned for you.
It definitely is aligned. I mean, I feel at home in this space. And I think the biggest thing that PYSC focuses on is just young people having equitable access to those activities. I mean, it blew my mind. The very first time I kind of did a sport event for young people, it was with my girls' organization, and we did a basketball clinic in South Philadelphia, and the parents, after it was over, kept saying, okay, no, what are you going to do next for us? And I said, well, you'll just go join your school teams. And they were like, we don't have school teams. And that was it. Wow. I just thought there's something wrong with that. Yeah. So I started digging and saying, like, well, where do kids access sport? And, that was at the time where the Kenney administration was taking office, and I was friendly with Jim, and he was part of the girls' organization at the very beginning. He encouraged me to kind of like think about bringing that to life. And, it just sort of snowballed. But the thing that I just was really called to was to try to solve that equity problem. I mean, and now there's a national movement that we're part of around sport equity and play equity. And it's true, like, there's no reason why a child shouldn't have access to quality play. There's no reason. And, the reason is money. And so that's what we're attacking, because you can't tell kids just because they have money, they get to do all those things and what everybody else doesn't, so we're really focused on that equity problem. And when you go into low income schools and neighborhoods, that's where it exists. So, that's where PYSC really focuses its time and energy.
Which is fantastic. There is such a great need. And to your point, we see it here in our city, but it really is nationwide. Mm-hmm. It's an issue that will take groups like yours forming and tackling this issue head on in order for a change to be made. And I want you to tell us, and now we know what the overall kind of mission and purpose of PYSC is. Can you get into what sports-based youth development actually is? Because I know when I first heard that term, I was like, I don't know what that is. But now that I know it better, it makes a whole lot of sense, especially as you're trying to tackle this issue of, equity. So what is at the core? How is that at the core of PYSC, and what is sports-based youth development? Well,
the first thing it is a mouthful. So we'll make it easy and call it SBYD, right? But yeah, I think that when you look at sport and when you think about how youth sport particularly, is presented, people's minds go to the challenges that you hear when, kids are specializing too early and their coaches are too serious and their parents are too serious and all those things. And I always say, well, at least they're on the field, right? Yes, those are problems. Those are challenges that people should address, but at least they're on the field, or at least they're on the court. And I think that when we think about sports-based youth development, it's an opportunity to deliver sport in a way that A, provides access to the sport in the first place, but then B, intentionally takes care of the child, and I think that sports has gotten away from that because people have professionalized it. So there's the professionalization problem, and then there's the access problem. And so sports-based youth development is really, at the core, it's providing a safe space with trained individuals who understand where their kids are coming from. And that's no matter where. That can be the burbs, that can be low income, high income, wherever. And uses the things that are inherent in sport to support the development of a kid. And when you think about what is in sport that does that, is, you have relationships with your teammates. You have skill building. You have relationships with caring adults. The caring part, is the hope that people are doing it for in the best interest of the child. And it has to be just in a safe, welcoming space. And so sports-based youth development, like, when you make the list of what it actually is, it's safety, it's accessibility, and then it's developing a skill set in a child while you're supporting their, physical, mental, and social emotional health. And anybody can do that if you practice with intention. It can be the most competitive sport or the very beginner recreational sport. It's the intention by which the adults in the room deliver. But sport carries the tools that allow you to do that in a really positive way if you think about it. And I think what's important to call out is, SBYD is being practiced in a lot of spaces without knowing the term. We will never sit and say you're doing it wrong. Sometimes it's just, let's flip the switch on and help you recognize the importance of your role in the development of the kids you have in front of you when you're a coach or when you're a program leader. There's so much there, and sometimes it just takes a little bit of turning the light bulb on to say, do you recognize your role in that? Do you recognize how those kids look to you? Do you recognize your importance in this process? And then let's use what sport brings to the table to develop the child. So it's really about, it's putting the kids first and putting them into safe, welcoming environments.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And that leads me to my next question, actually, because this whole process of sports-based youth development, you're right, it is a mouthful. The whole point of that is really, it comes down to the coaching. Mm-hmm. It comes down to the adults in the situation and getting them to understand it. So unlike other educators, youth sport coaches often receive little training. Can you tell us more about that and the importance of programs to support educating coaches properly? Mm-hmm. And how's the collaborative working to achieve that?
Yeah, so I think about this a lot. When parents pay for a program, whether it be the parents who are investing thousands and thousands of dollars for their children in youth sport, or people who are paying $15 to go down and participate in something at the rec center, you're asking an adult to spend anywhere from 6 to 20 hours with your child per week, and yet the training around how to work with children doesn't necessarily happen for coaches. A lot of coaches go through what we call technical training. You might have to have CPR. You might have to have mandated reporting. You may have to go through a concussion training, depending on the sport that you're coaching. But just like, you're a teacher, and yet you're left to your own devices with how you will teach and how you will approach working with kids. You learned from your coaches. Well, I've had great coaches and I've had not so great coaches. Like, no offense, it's life. I've had a million coaches. There are always going to be some that are good and some that you don't remember, like, with what did they bring, so I think to ask an individual to do that without supporting them in just even how to build a relationship with a child, you can't assume because they're a parent, which a lot of parents get pulled into coaching. You can't assume because they're a parent that they're going to have the skill set to work with all different kids, right? And every kid brings their stuff into a practice, their stuff into a team situation. And so what we do is try to close that gap, because I know, I think about this now. I coached for 20 years, and man, do I wish someone got a hold of me when I was 23 and said, here's how to do it. I had to figure it out. And I'm trying to, you think about even just the stupid technical stuff. I'm trying to run like a college offense with a bunch of 7th grade girls, that's not going to fly. So even just like the silly parts, the parts that you think, oh, well, I'll just do what my coach did. And it's like, well, you were playing at a Division I school with a coach who did that for 30 years. Like, no, you can't you have to translate it. And so I think that just the expectations that we have put on coaches and then the demands, it's just not a fair fight. So, now we add the layer of also, you have coaches who ideally come from communities where the kids are being served and are going through a lot of the things that the kids in their community are going through when they come and bring their stuff into the space. And so when you expect somebody to do that without any equipment, without any toolbox. Like, that's a really, really hard thing. And I think that's why we're seeing such a decline in people stepping up to coach. And so we want to support that community, because we know not only do they need support in connecting with kids in a meaningful way and helping them along, they need support themselves. Like I think about our football community. You have people in really tough neighborhoods putting kids on football fields and supporting them through that entire process. Who's supporting the coaches? And I think that's a role that we can play. So the way that we do that is we work with nationally recognized coach entities that do coach education. And yes, we do the technical trainings, like the CPR and mandated reporting. They're all very important. But what we try to provide is a community for coaches to understand their value, understand their worth in this space, understand their responsibilities, and then understand where they can get help. And so the different things that we train on are, we work on trauma-informed coaching. We know that people have trauma. When you grow up in a neighborhood where there's gunfire and incarcerated people and under-resourced schools and under-resourced rec centers, there's a lot going on with children in those spaces. And so just by connection, there's a lot going on with their coaches. So we want to support the community in a way where everybody feels that they can use sport to be this good community thing, and that people can walk away from it feeling good about the work and about what they're providing to children in their communities. And, like I said, I wish I had all this knowledge too. I would have handled probably half the kids I worked with over my life differently had I known some of the things that we hope to provide. And so the other thing we do is we provide coach education around mentoring. Like, what are the 10 things you need to do to be a good mentor? Notice we're not talking about X's and O's. This is all just how do you support people in connecting with kids, because kids have it tough. And it can be city kids, it can be rural kids, it can be suburban kids. Everybody's coming in with different bags. And so, coaches are expected to help, but we need to help coaches.
Yeah,
and
so
that's sort of where it comes.
When I hear you say that, it just clicks that we have expected so much of people who are volunteers.
Yeah.
And then the impact that they have on your child is immense, but can be immense in a negative or positive way. But usually somebody that's stepping up to volunteer has the best intentions, right? And they want to do the best they can for your child. But to your point, they just don't always know how to, and that's not their fault. But it's important that there be some sort of, support there behind them. And I want you to explain a little bit kind of how PYSC is a backbone organization. And so how is it that you really work to support your members? Tell us about the member organizations. How many organizations are currently involved, and about how many youth are being served by those organizations in the Philadelphia area? And how does this work with PYSC as sort of the backbone?
Yeah. So when we talk about coaches, we're not just talking about people off the street, right? Like, hey, coaches, come, we're going to train. So we work with, at this point, we're at 95 organizations who kind of sit under the PYSC umbrella. And by that, it just means that they've agreed to be part of our community of practice. And, our job, our role is to say, well, if we're going to center this community of practice around these standards, we will train our coaches. We'll make sure that we are providing safe spaces. We'll be thinking about, the emotional and physical and mental development of our kids, and put that first. If we're going to say that we're going to get around those standards, then our job is to make sure that everybody has the tools that they need to actually follow through. And so our community of practice, we provide services that we hope help them to just do their job better maybe than when they walked in the door. Or I always say, I'm never going to tell anybody they're doing it wrong, because it works in so many different ways. But if an organization steps into our community of practice and trains 10 of their coaches, and 10 of their coaches just are awake now to the fact that they are so critical, because a lot of coaches don't think of themselves that way. But the truth is, those kids are watching every move and they're listening to everything you say. And so when we work together to just have an understanding of how critical sport can be in a child's life, then we're doing our job. We want to support the community in the best way we can. The other thing that we do is we advocate based on what we learn from the community itself. So, we'll provide not just training of coaches, and we do nonprofit training for boards and for staff of organizations. But then we also do, we provide outcome measurement tools, because people, if you're going to say you're doing something, you need to measure it. And if our community says we're helping kids, we need to measure it. And so we've done a lot of work around social and emotional learning, because that sort of bridges the techniques. Like if you're delivering sport, but this one's got basketball, and this one's got soccer, and this one's got tennis, and then some focus on academics, but others focus on leadership, and others focus on this. Social emotional learning really is the bridge. Like it's the thing that sport can do no matter how you deliver it and no matter what you focus, because it's all about building good relationships with kids. And so we measure social emotional learning. And what we know is that all activities in the after school space do a good job of increasing the capacities of young people in social and emotional learning, but sports does it best. Like all the numbers show sport just ahead of all the other things. And that's really because of the other stuff that's in sport, that the camaraderie with your teammates and the responsibility that you feel with one another, because, I always liken it to a boat. Like if you're on a crew team and you don't show up, your boat doesn't go, so that you are responsible to your teammates. And so there's some of the things that sport just has built in that really support that. So that's how we support our member community. But then we also survey them a lot, and we ask them, what are your pain points? What are the challenges you're seeing? Talk to us about the spaces that you're providing your programs in. How can we be helpful? And then we take all that information and we go and we sit down with city council and we sit down with, the administration and say, here are the investments. If you're going to make investments, these are the investments that we believe you can make in the youth sport community so that they can support the city's kids in a even more meaningful way. We're trying to alleviate the roadblocks that get thrown up in front of youth providers all the time. Yeah. And so that's kind of that's like the full circle of membership is, we provide services for them. We learn from all the people doing the great work. And then we take all that information and we go kind of bang on doors and say, hey, this community's serving, we're over 100,000 kids collectively. So let's figure out how we can support the organizations that are doing this work.
That to me is the critical part here, is that you're able to access or, gather the data that supports, and then you can go to the right people and say, here, we have the information that this is how we need to serve our city's children better in the lane of sports. And then you're able to actually get it done.
Yeah. Hopefully. I mean, in a lot of ways, it really, bureaucracies move real slow, but I feel like the last administration and this administration have made very strong commitments to the youth sport community because they know it works. And so we were really thrilled when the new administration took over and made a very strong early statement about the importance of youth sport, because the last administration really supported it. And now we know that we have that stepping stone. And I think it's just, we're also in this, because we're a backbone and we're not the bureaucracy, we can call things out without hurting anybody's feelings.
Yeah.
We can say, like, you can't say that your Parks and Rec system is going to be this safe haven for young people when we've done the research on every single youth sport play space and the lights aren't on, or the doors are locked, or there's no bathroom access. So let's put the data to work to say, well, let's address, if we really want Parks and Rec to be this place, this community place, then let's fix these little things, because the little things sometimes are the easiest things to get fixed, sometimes they're the hardest, but those are the things that'll open the doors that will allow you to say, yes, we will create and give Parks and Rec the resources. It's not Parks and Rec's fault. Yeah. They don't have the resources to do certain things. So if you're going to make a commitment to youth sport, you have to commit to the spaces. You have to commit to the people. You have to, that's a commitment that isn't just let's throw some money around and hope youth sports makes out. You have to really you have to commit to addressing the challenges. And we're in this like middleman space where we can identify those challenges and we can present them with the data that backs them up and say, here's where you should be making investments, and then you'll see what'll happen.
Yes. And you're really keeping everything going. Like you said, from one administration to the next, it's promising to know that the commitment's still there, but there's still such a great need for organizations like yours to keep holding everybody to it, basically, and making sure that it moves forward. And I want to talk more about the importance of partnerships and collaborations when it comes to creating a citywide program in which all youth have access to high-quality sports youth-based development programs. So can you tell us more about how PYSC helps to facilitate these important partnerships and collaborations to better serve the community as a whole?
Yeah, I think we've talked a little bit about it, but I think that our role is really to, the first partners we identify, you have to go where the kids are, right? So we know that the school district is a major partner. We know that Parks and Rec is a major partner. So we can play a role in, okay, let's identify what the pain points are, and then let's pilot some things that we think will address them. And we've piloted some things that worked and we piloted some things that didn't, but that's our role as a backbone that sort of sits outside of the systems. We want a better system, and there's things that I think it's really important to note that like PYSC is a working partner. We're not going to hem and haw and tell you everything that's wrong and not roll our sleeves up. Like, we're part of the solution. And, and I think that's the difference. Advocacy is a piece of what we do, but it isn't all that we do. But we can do it because we sit outside the system, and we can say, you're not resourcing these people enough to do what you want them to do. So, when we call those things out, that's our role. And I think that partners, Philadelphia's a big place. And if our groups are collectively serving 100,000 kids, well, there's 220,000 kids or more in the city. So let's work together to see where we can create more opportunities equitably so that kids, where they want to access sport, can access sport. And it's really just identifying the opportunity spaces. We for example, one of the things we're finding is that Parks and Rec doesn't have enough staff to run their own programs at every center. It's not feasible. And they also don't have a staffing pipeline because, a lot of the programmatic work in big systems like that is part-time. So we said, well, how do we create a pipeline and create coaches that are at locations and see what happens? And so we know about the national group called Up to Us Sports, and they provide AmeriCorps positions where you can place coaches. So now we're recruiting coaches from various communities, and we're putting them at the community rec center, and we placed 10 coaches and immediately 500 more kids were served, right? So there's a solution, and it's quarter of the price of hiring somebody full-time. So City of Philadelphia, if you want to make an investment in youth sport, this is a great way to do it, and we'll manage it. We hired a guy to manage that program until we get it so it's so proven and so embedded that the city will manage it itself. So those are that's just an example of where we can identify a solution and not just be like, you don't have the right people. we got to get in, and we have to use our knowledge of youth sport and the space and we have, I don't know, there's got to be like 20 cities now that we meet regularly because they're doing this work too. And we're saying, well, how are you addressing that? How did you address that? We learn from everybody, bring it in and say, okay, what will work here in Philadelphia? And then we pilot it. And so that's why I say we're a working partner. We're not just going to call out the mess. We're going to help solve the challenges. And so, we've had 4 or 5 of those examples. And the hope is that we can continue to work with the city administration and in the cases where it's at schools, the school district, to say, let's just continue the work. Let's make sure that we're putting programs in places, because some kids' parents might say, oh, I want my kids to be at school as long as possible until I pick them up when I'm finished my, second job. Or, nope, my kids have to come home right after school because they're maybe taking care of younger ones, but I'd love to see something at my rec center. It's like, well, that's 2 completely different needs. But if you want equity, you have to address both those needs. And so that's where we are as a supportive working partner.
I'm so glad that we got to sit here and talk through all of this, because I think that people don't understand that this, like, the depth of how this works and the need that's there, and how an organization like yours is doing such an incredible job to put all the pieces together. Kind of as you were saying earlier, you saw yourself as more of a puzzle, putting a puzzle together is more your thing. And I think it's just incredible to see all the different ways that your organization is working to support all of these different organizations in doing the important work to serve all of the children. And can you tell us more about the fund that you have?
Sure.
That you're working to help support some of these smaller organizations. I wanted to hear a little bit more about that too.
Yeah. So, we've been at it for 8 years and through a pandemic, and, we're learning all the time. And then, like I said, we pilot things that we think might work. And so one of the things that we kept recognizing was that in the beginning of PYSC, all the members sort of looked like traditional nonprofits. They might have had a staff of anywhere from like 1 to 10 or maybe more if you're PAL or YMCA, a lot more. And then, but as our work with Parks and Rec started to really take off, we started seeing a lot more of what I wouldn't call it non-traditional, but they weren't the nonprofits that you'd see that highly visible, staff driven, but it was more community-based organizations who were very much providing youth sport in their neighborhoods, but didn't have the infrastructure in a lot of cases, or simply qualify for larger grants. Or they were volunteer driven and don't have the time to be writing larger grants. And there's just a lot of challenges. And when we dig into the challenges, it's always resources. And so we thought, well, how do we get resources to the smaller organizations that don't get swallowed up by the larger, more established organizations who have grant writers on staff? That's a big difference. And so we were talking over time with a council member Isaiah Thomas, and he was able to secure some funds from the city that we said, let's test a grant. And so we did, and we just actually named all the grantees, and we had 55 organizations reach out to apply for this grant with, the stipulation that you were under a certain size, and there was things that we categorized who we wanted the dollars to go to. And we didn't even really blast it. We put it out to our membership, and we put it to each council office and said, if you know of anybody, send them to this link. And 55 organizations applied. So that screams the need is there. And so we said as an organization, PYSC was never going to be a funding organization. We were going to just provide services and be a backbone. But, a lot of our organizations across the country fund. And some fund big dollars, some fund little dollars. And we said, it's the one thing we're not doing. And now we recognize this need, or we've learned about it more and more over time. So we said, let's do it. So we granted the first pot of money, and now our job is we're going to build a fund, and hopefully it gets so big that we can endow it and grant a certain amount every year. But our hope is that the city will invest a little bit, and the state will invest a little bit, and then we can leverage those dollars with the the corporate and the public, and try to just get it up real high, and then support some of the organizations that are doing incredible work in their neighborhoods as best they can, and really just raise money, put the kids on the field, and do it all over again. $5,000, $10,000 to organizations like that would just alleviate so much of the extra work, and allow them to focus on and have fun with their kids, And so that's what we're hoping to achieve with the fund, and we'll see where it goes.
I love this idea because I do have knowledge from the nonprofit perspective of how many people I've met that are doing incredible things in their communities, and they're doing them really well. But as you were saying earlier, they don't have a grant writer. They don't have, and it's tough because there are lots of grants to be had out there. There are lots of funds to access to help support, missions that many of these nonprofits might fall under. But if you don't have the ability or the resources or just the bandwidth to go after these grants, because it's a very labor-intensive process to even just apply for these grants, and you don't know that you're going to get it. I just love this idea because exactly what you said, you're just giving the right amount of dollars to these organizations that are going to put it right to work, and it's just going to make the way they do things run a lot more smoothly and less complicated. And that's it's just promising and exciting. And I'm sure really gives each of those organizations like such a boost of confidence, because you also can get so tied down and like exhausted, I'm sure, by being that small community driven nonprofit that's doing all the things, you know, and start to feel like, am I ever going to be able to do this with a little bit more ease?
Yeah, I think that, you know, one of the things that really struck me, and we solicited larger member organizations to carve out the grants, which was really another really cool way to engage our community. You know, they didn't qualify because their revenues were too high. You know, we separated that out. And one of the things that struck me that came up in the conversation, and I was very much not an advisor, just sort of a fly on the wall watching the whole process play out. But one of the things that really was meaningful was so many of the organizations, when the grant application asks, what are you going to do with the money? So many of them mention it'll reduce fees for our families. You know, and it's like that's just like another level of good people doing good work in good communities and just wanting the best for their families and their kids. And they want to do it without that burden. And so let's alleviate the burden. Let's find the resources, not just in this grant, but like other resources where maybe that, you know, there's organizations that maybe give scholarships for kids so that they can participate without having to worry about it. Like that's where the equity comes in. It's if it costs $5 and $5 is too much for that family, that's not equitable. So let's ease that pain for families, for organizations, for anybody doing this work, so that kids can just play. It's at the end of it, we just want kids to play, and they should have that wherever they are. They should have it in their neighborhoods, they should have it at their schools, and they should be able to access it safely no matter where they are.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And so that actually does lead me to my next question, because on this podcast, we often discuss the topics of community and compassion, which I think are very wrapped up in exactly what you just said. And first, I'm going to ask, can you tell us what your own definition of compassion is? And then we'll move on to community.
Yeah, it's funny. I think about it more from a standpoint of empathy. And so I thought, well, let me look up what's the dictionary say? And the word that the dictionary uses, which really doesn't sit right with me, is pity. It's like, nobody needs my pity, you know? That really bothered me. And I just thought, I think that when you think about compassion, you have to just think about experience and being open to understanding the experience of others. And so it is more empathy to me than it is compassion. It's having a feeling and being open to understand where people come from and where people's pain points are and how they view what you're viewing. You know, how are we viewing the same thing, and where do we meet anywhere or not? And if you can do that, then you can really build connection with others. And I think that compassion just sort of becomes part of it, as opposed to I'm going to be a compassionate person. It's like, well, how are you doing that? And I think a lot of it really comes through empathy and just trying to understand people's experiences, because everyone comes to the table with different life experiences. And if you don't take the time to sort of understand that, then you're probably not going to click on a compassionate level. It might just be transactional, and that's okay too in certain instances. But I think if you're thinking about compassion, you have to think about empathy.
I totally agree. And I also am rubbed the wrong way by the word pity.
Yeah.
Because when I think of compassion, it really is, like you said, the empathy aspect. It's putting yourself in someone else's shoes and trying to, on this topic, I think of how compassion plays into it for me. Is I think about, I have young children in sports right now, right? And I live in the suburbs, and I'm not going to say it's easy to pay for all the things, because it's not. Like, that would be a lie to say that it's easy. Maybe for some it is. But when your kids are really involved, and these programs can be very expensive, and you do see the incredible value that your kids get out of it, so you want that for them. But I think if it's struggle for me sometimes, how awful that must feel, or how hard that must be for someone of a lower income, that they want the same things for their child that I do, you know, and they don't. Not only may they not be able to afford it, it may not exist.
Right.
for them at all. Like, it's not even an option. And so to me, that's where I have this compassionate response, but maybe it is more so empathy of I want to put myself in your shoes and think of, what I want for my child, I want for your child too.
Yeah.
I want for all children. And it really is going to require some work, though, to figure out how we can even things out and make sure not only that there's fair pricing, but there's fair access and so many of those things that you are clearly working very hard to address.
Yeah. I always go back to, like, when we talk about the work, it's when you grew up, there was some sort of rec. You could just go find somebody doing something and get involved in it. And it's like, if the professionalization of sport has taken that out of the realm of any income level, because there's some people who have plenty of money who still can't afford the absurdity of, like, the professionalized youth sports space. We got to just bring rec back, like we got to have people. And if the city wants this as a resource, or any location wants this as a resource, you just got to invest in the people. And there's plenty of people, but you do need to invest in them. And when you invest in organizations, you see great things. When you invest in individuals, you see great things. And so around sport, of all things, in our city of all places, let's make the investments and we'll see great things. There's already great things going on. Yeah. Let's not be fooled. But when you invest, the sky's the limit. And I'm that's totally, like, cliche, but the truth is we have watched COVID created a lot of investment. And the results are staggering. They're amazing. What small organizations were able to do with COVID money, let's do that. Let's do that for everybody, because they're taking care of our kids. So I think that's what we'd love to see. And we'll just keep working towards it.
Oh, it's such good stuff, because you're right. There's a lot of good already happening, but there are a lot of good people who want to help, who would love, maybe they're retired and they'd love to work with children in the sports space, but they don't have the ability to do that right now. So build these people up and give them the opportunity. I love that. So we also talk about community a lot. Why would you say community is so important, especially to the youth that you're aiming to serve here in Philadelphia?
Well, sports is just that. I mean, you think about the studies over time that if sports exists, community gets built around it. If you think about, no matter where you are, if you put your child on a team, suddenly you have a family around you, whether you know them before or not, but sports builds community. That's why we call our membership a community of practice. We are people who are just building community through sport wherever we can put it. And so I think in sport it comes naturally. A lot of things do. And so with that community, oh gosh, just the amazing things you see. I mean, children who've lost family members and their team and their people rally around them. Like the kids that I've spoken to about why is team so important? They're my family, and that happens in sport. And so the more children who can access that belonging, the better. I know for me, it was critical. Like I wouldn't be in this chair if I hadn't been like a kid who played sports. And so I know that for a fact. So, let's use this tool for everything it brings and, get more and more kids in there, because kids need community, especially now. I mean, the pandemic really shut kids off from just their friends and their mentors. And yes, there's kids that are always just in their phone, and that's not real community. It's like perceived community. Yeah. So sport brings people into real community. And so that's why I think in our sector, it's just so important to make sure that it's there and it's reliable and it's good and quality and trained people are around, and we're putting the best interests of the kids first.
And if kids get that from a younger age, like they get that sense of community, I can only imagine what that does for them and, the trajectory of their life from that point forward. To feel like you belong to something, you belong somewhere, when maybe elsewhere you've never experienced that can shift your whole life going forward.
Absolutely. You find your people, and not all family is blood. And so when you can pick and choose your people because you're exposed to incredible opportunities with friends and coaches and, caring adults, you can really go far. And I think that that's what sport can bring to kids, no matter where they are.
Yeah. And that's really what PYSC is working to facilitate and encourage. And I just can't thank you enough for sharing all of this with me. Because like I said, it's a little complicated from a high level of what is it that you guys actually do. But we got into it today to understand the need and how you're working to meet it for so many organizations across our city and serving over 100,000 youth, right?
Yeah. I guess I would just say it's really important for us to make sure that we continue to put the providers first. I mean, we're piloting some programs where our team works with some kids, or we put the puzzle pieces together so that kids can have access to different things. But the people on the ground are just so impactful in so many different ways. And we want to celebrate them and amplify the work that they're doing. And that's a big part of us too, is really just letting people know that those organizations exist. And, people always say, well, how do we get involved? I say, look at our member list. Who do you want to get connected to? We'll connect you right now, because it's not us. Yes. It's the people doing the work in the communities, and they don't get celebrated enough. And it's, they are really faced with a lot of challenges sometimes, just with the resources and everything else. So our members are the reason we exist. And so we want to make sure that people know about them. So if you go to PYSC.org, you'll get to our member list, and you can kind of see the breadth and depth of the organizations that we're serving, and people can serve them themselves. If something resonates, we always say, go ahead, volunteer, throw them some cash, like that. They'll put it
however you can.
We can vouch that they're going to put any resource you give them to good work, whether it's your time or, a donation. Our organizations will put that to good use, and they will support kids with it.
I think your endorsement of them goes a long way too. Like, for people to access this list of organizations, hear everything that you just said and how PYSC works and supports all these organizations. But for you to say, we know these organizations, we know these people, we know they're doing good things. People are sometimes reluctant to, donate when they don't really know what the organization is or what they do. Like, I think it's important that you already have this list of organizations to say, go take a look, and we would encourage you to support them.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and that's where finding some of the smaller organizations is really valuable to, how we can tell this story, because they might not get found otherwise. And we're not doing anything. They are doing the work, and the organizations that are providing for kids are front and center. But how would maybe a donor find them if, we found them because we happened to be at their rec center that day,
Yes.
So the hope is that we can amplify everybody's story in a way that is meaningful to them and meaningful to people who are interested in youth sport. I mean, I think it's interesting always when I talk about what I do and people are like, really? Like, sport doesn't exist in some schools? And it's like, see what you're used to?
Yeah.
Like, that's not even a question in a lot of schools and neighborhoods. And so when it's a question, organizations like the ones that we work with need support to do what they do. And so it's a great way to connect people to it. Yeah. Yeah.
So I will definitely say, I encourage everybody to check out that list that's on your website, and then just repeat the website for us again and tell us, your social handles and how people can follow along with PYSC.
Yeah. So PYSC.org is our website, and that is, it will be there, and then we're refreshing it. So there'll be a new look later this summer. And boy, the handles. We are on all of the social medias. We're going to have to get you the hand.
That's fine. I'll put them in the show notes.
At Philly Youth Sport, or at Philly Youth Sports is
the main
where
handle.
You're going to find us. Yeah.
And I'll link all of this in the show notes.
Great.
So that's easy for everyone to find. But thank you so much, Beth, for being here today.
Great opportunity.
And for sharing all of this with us.
Thank you. I really do appreciate your support over time and you reaching out to allow me to be a part of this today. So
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.